waiting room smelled like money. Not the honest kind. Not the smell of grease-darkened hands or a thermos of cold coffee left on a workbench at midnight. This was the other kind. Leather chairs that had never been sat in hard. A coffee machine that made drinks with Italian names. A receptionist who smiled the way people smile when they've been trained to smile, not when something has actually made them happy. Marcus Webb sat in one of those leather chairs with his daughter Lily on his knee, and he did not belong there, and everyone in the room knew it. He was 44 years old. He wore a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the red had faded to the color of old brick. His boots were steel-toed and scarred. His hands, wide, calloused, with engine oil still living in the creases of his knuckles no matter how long he scrubbed, rested quietly on Lily's small shoulders like two tired animals that had finally been allowed to stop. Lily was 7. She had her father's dark eyes and her late mother's habit of watching everything very carefully before she said a single word. She was watching the room now. She always watched. Marcus had not come to buy anything. He had come because his neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patrice Okafor, had asked him to come. Her car, a silver luxury sedan, the kind the dealership's brochure called a statement of arrival, had been sitting in the dealership's service bay for 19 days. 19 days. The service team had changed the battery. They had replaced a sensor. They had run diagnostics 3 separate times on 3 separate machines that cost more than Marcus earned in 4 months. And still the engine would not start cleanly. It would turn over, shudder, hesitate, then die like a man who keeps trying to stand up and keeps being pushed back down. Mrs. Okafor was 71 years old, recently widowed, and had no other way to get to her dialysis appointments across town. She had called Marcus because she had no one else to call. Marcus had come because that was simply what he did. He had barely settled into the chair when the service manager appeared. His name tag said Derek, Customer Experience Lead. Derek was 31, wore a pressed white shirt with a small dealership logo over his heart, and had the particular confidence of a man who has never once doubted that his opinion is the most important one in any room he enters. He looked at Marcus the way certain people look at things they are already planning to move out of the way. "Can I help you?" Derek said. The sentence was polite. The tone was not. Marcus explained quietly. Mrs. Okafor's vehicle. 19 days. The engine issue. He mentioned, without any drama, that he had some experience with this particular engine family. That he thought he might know what was causing the hesitation. Derek smiled. It was a very specific kind of smile. The kind that means I am about to explain something to you that you are not going to understand. Sir, our master technicians have run full diagnostic sweeps on that vehicle. We have ASE certified mechanics with a combined 40 years of experience on staff. I don't think... He paused just long enough to make the pause mean something. A second opinion is really what this situation calls for. Marcus did not argue. He never argued. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is storing information rather than responding to it. Lily looked up at her father. She slipped her small hand into his. He squeezed it once, gently, and that was all. They were asked, with practiced politeness, to wait. So they waited. 40 minutes passed. Then an hour. Through the glass partition that separated the waiting room from the service floor, Marcus could see the silver sedan sitting exactly where it had sat for 19 days. He could see 2 technicians standing beside it, arms crossed, talking in the low, careful voices of men who are out of ideas but not yet willing to say so out loud. He watched them with the quiet patience of someone who has spent 23 years learning to read engines the way other people read faces. Not from the manual but from the sound, from the rhythm, from the particular way a machine tells you where it hurts if you are still enough to listen. At one point, a different staff member, younger, kinder, not yet fully shaped by the culture of the place, brought Lily a small cup of apple juice and a packet of crackers. Lily said thank you very seriously, the way children do when they understand that kindness is not always automatic. Marcus watched his daughter and felt the particular ache that single fathers carry like a stone in the chest. The awareness that she sees everything, absorbs everything, and will one day understand exactly what this moment meant. He was not angry. Anger, Marcus had learned long ago, was a luxury he could not afford and had never found useful. What he felt instead was something quieter and more enduring, a kind of settled certainty. The certainty of a man who knows exactly what he is capable of, who has never needed anyone else to know it, but who has driven 40 minutes across town on a Tuesday afternoon for a 71-year-old woman, who cannot get to dialysis because a room full of certified professionals and Italian coffee machines and leather chairs cannot solve a problem that he solved in his mind approximately 8 minutes after he walked through the door. He looked down at Lily. She was eating her crackers with great seriousness, one at a time. "Dad?" she said quietly, without looking up. "Yeah, Bug. Can you fix it?" He looked through the glass at the silver sedan, at the two technicians still standing with their arms crossed, at the machine that had been sitting still for 19 days. "Yeah," he said. "I can fix it." She nodded. She already knew. Marcus Webb had not always been the kind of man who sat quietly in waiting rooms while other people underestimated him. There was a time, a younger time, a louder time, when he had believed that competence spoke for itself, that if you were good enough at something, the world would eventually turn and notice. He had spent the better part of his 20s learning, slowly and at considerable cost, that this was not how the world worked. The world did not notice quiet men. The world noticed loud men, credentialed men, men with the right haircut and the right handshake and the right kind of confidence that had nothing to do with actually knowing anything. Marcus had the wrong kind of confidence. The kind that lived deep and still and did not need an audience. It had cost him more than he could count. He had grown up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the second of 4 children, in a house where the heat sometimes worked and sometimes did not, and where his father, a man of very few words and very large hands, had taught him that there were 2 kinds of people in the world. People who called someone else when something broke and people who fixed it themselves. His father had been a mechanic in the way that certain men are musicians, not because they chose it, but because it was simply the language their minds spoke most fluently. Marcus had inherited this completely. By the time he was 12, he was rebuilding small engines in the backyard. By 16, he could diagnose a transmission problem by sound alone. By 19, he had turned down a partial scholarship to a state engineering program because the family needed money now, not in 4 years, and Marcus had never been the kind of person who chose himself when someone else needed choosing. He had worked at a regional auto shop for 6 years, then a larger fleet maintenance company, then for nearly a decade as the lead diagnostic technician at a mid-sized dealership 2 counties over. A job he was extraordinary at and was paid ordinarily for, which had never particularly surprised him. He had met Claire at a county fair when he was 28. She was a schoolteacher with paint on her shoes and a laugh that sounded like it had been waiting all day to come out. They had married within the year. Lily had arrived 2 years after that, small and watchful and already, somehow, more serious than most adults Marcus knew. Claire had died when Lily was 3. An aneurysm, sudden and total, on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday morning in March. Marcus had been at work when it happened. He had gotten the call between jobs, standing in a parking lot with engine grease on his forearms and a cup of gas station coffee in his hand, and the world had simply rearranged itself. Not shattered, rearranged, into a before and an after, and the after had required him to become someone new without any time to grieve the person he had been. He had done it. That was the only word for it. He had simply done it. He had taken Lily home from the hospital where they had kept her for observation during those first terrible days, buckled her into the car seat. Claire had spent 3 weeks researching before buying, driven home, carried his daughter inside, and begun the long, wordless work of raising her alone. He had found a daycare. He had learned to braid hair, badly at first and then adequately, and then, by Lily's 5th birthday, rather well. He had learned which foods she would eat when she was sad and which stories she needed to hear before she could sleep, and exactly how long she needed to be held after a bad dream before the fear left her body. He had learned all of it the way he learned everything, by paying attention, by being patient, by caring more about getting it right than about looking like he already knew. He had opened his own small shop 4 years after Claire died. Nothing impressive from the outside. A rented bay in an industrial strip on the edge of town, a second-hand lift, a diagnostic system he had assembled himself from components, and a reputation that spread entirely by word of mouth because Marcus had never once in his life known how to market himself and had never particularly wanted to learn. What he had was something quieter and more durable than marketing. He had the absolute trust of every person who had ever brought him a car. People drove from 2 counties away. People called him before they called the dealership. People like Mrs. Patrice Okafor, who had gotten his number from her late husband's address book and held on to it for 3 years before she finally needed it. And now here he was, sitting in a leather chair that smelled like corporate ambition, his daughter eating crackers beside him with the gravity of a small philosopher, waiting to be acknowledged by people who had already decided he had nothing to offer. He thought about Claire sometimes in moments like these, not with grief anymore, or not only with grief, but with a kind of quiet conversation. He would think, "You would have had something sharp and funny to say about this room." And he would almost hear her say it. And it would make him feel, for just a moment, less alone in the particular loneliness of being a man whom the world keeps not seeing. Lily finished her crackers. She folded the empty packet with great precision and held it in her lap, waiting for a trash can, because Marcus had raised her to not leave her mess for other people. She looked up at him with those dark, patient eyes. "How long do we have to wait?" she asked. Marcus looked at the clock on the wall, then through the glass at the silver sedan, then back at his daughter. "Not much longer," he said. He was not talking about the waiting room. Derek Callahan had not been born dismissive. That was the important thing to understand about him. The thing that made him something more complicated than a villain and something more honest than an obstacle. He had been built carefully and over many years into exactly what he was. A man who had learned to measure the worth of other people by the visible markers they carried, because the institution he served had taught him, consistently and with great reward, that this was the correct and efficient way to operate. He had grown up in the suburbs of Nashville, the eldest son of a mid-level insurance executive who believed deeply in the power of appearances. His father had driven a car that was slightly beyond their means, had worn shirts that were slightly crisper than necessary, had coached Derek, from an early age, in the subtle art of reading a room, not for what it contained, but for what it signaled. Derek had been an obedient student. He had graduated from a business program at a mid-tier university with a concentration in customer relations, had interned at an automotive group during his junior year, and had discovered something that felt, at the time, like a calling. He was extraordinarily good at managing the experience of wealthy customers. He understood intuitively what they wanted, which was not primarily to have their cars repaired, but to feel that they were being taken seriously by people who were also serious. He could deliver this feeling with remarkable precision. It had made him, by 31, the youngest customer experience lead in the dealership group's history. His regional director had called him a natural. He kept this compliment close. The dealership itself was a cathedral to a particular kind of success. It sat at the edge of a commercial district that had been carefully designed to feel inevitable, as though prosperity had simply gathered here organically, rather than being assembled by a real estate developer with a very specific vision of who should feel welcome and who should not. The showroom floor gleamed. The service bays were hospital clean. The technicians wore uniforms that had been selected by a brand consultant. Everything about the place communicated the same essential message. "We know what we are doing, and you are fortunate to be here." This message was not entirely false. The dealership did employ skilled technicians. It did have sophisticated diagnostic equipment. It did, in most cases, fix cars competently and on schedule. But it had also developed, over years of operating at the premium end of the market, a specific kind of institutional blindness, the blindness of organizations that have been successful enough for long enough to mistake their process for wisdom. When the diagnostic machines said one thing, the technicians believed the machines. When the machines ran out of answers, the technicians ran the machines again. The idea that the answer might live somewhere outside the system, in a man's hands, in 23 years of intuitive experience, in the particular way an engine's hesitation pattern told a story if you knew how to listen, was not a possibility the institution had built any space for. Derek embodied this blindness not out of malice but out of formation. He was not cruel. He was, in his own way, genuinely committed to doing his job well. But his idea of doing his job well had been shaped entirely within a system that valued credentials, appearance, and institutional authority above all else. And so when Marcus Webb had walked into his waiting room in a faded flannel shirt with oil in his knuckles and a 7-year-old on his knee, Derek had performed an assessment that took approximately 4 seconds and had felt, to him, like professionalism. What he had not considered, what the institution had never trained him to consider, was that the most important knowledge in any room is almost never worn on the outside. He returned to the waiting area once more that afternoon, approximately 90 minutes after his first appearance. He carried a tablet. He had the careful expression of a man who is about to deliver difficult information in a way that protects himself from responsibility for it. "So we've completed another review of Mrs. Okafor's vehicle," he said, addressing Marcus with the tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. "At this point, we believe the issue may be beyond standard service repair. We're recommending she consider her options regarding the vehicle's future." He paused. "We can connect her with our pre-owned sales team if she'd like to discuss a replacement." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Lily had fallen asleep against his arm, her head tilted, her mouth slightly open, her small hand still holding the folded cracker packet. "So you're giving up on it?" Marcus said. Not accusatory, simply clarifying. Derek's expression shifted just briefly, just a fraction, into something that might have been discomfort. "We've exhausted our diagnostic resources on this particular issue, yes." 19 days, Marcus said. "We understand that's been an inconvenience." "She can't get to dialysis," Marcus said. Still quiet, still even. 3 times a week. Across town. Derek looked at his tablet. "We do have a courtesy shuttle program." "I'd like to look at the engine," Marcus said. The room went still in the specific way rooms go still when something is about to change and only one person in the room knows it yet. Derek looked at him, at the flannel shirt, at the scarred boots, at the sleeping child. He performed his 4-second assessment again, arrived at the same conclusion, and made the decision that would follow him for considerably longer than he anticipated. "Sir," he said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person they have already decided cannot understand it, "I really don't think that's going to be productive." Marcus nodded slowly. He looked down at Lily. He thought about Mrs. Okafor and her dialysis appointments and her late husband's address book where she had kept his number for 3 years just in case. "Let me try," he said. "One night. You've already given up on it. What do you have to lose?" They let him in at 6:15 in the evening, after the last customer had gone and most of the service staff had clocked out. A junior technician named Rowan, 23 years old, quiet, with the particular attentiveness of a young person who was still genuinely trying to learn, had been asked to stay and supervise, which was the dealership's way of allowing Marcus access while maintaining the appearance of institutional control. Rowan had shaken Marcus's hand without any of Derek's assessment in his eyes, and for this Marcus had felt a small, uncomplicated gratitude. Lily sat on a rolling stool in the corner of the bay with Marcus's old canvas work bag beside her, doing her homework in a composition notebook, occasionally looking up to watch her father with the calm patience of someone attending a performance they have seen before and trust completely. Marcus stood in front of Mrs. Okafor's silver sedan for 2 full minutes before he touched it. This was something Rowan would remember later, the stillness of it. The way Marcus looked at the engine bay, the way other men looked at the faces of people they were trying to understand. Not scanning, not assessing with a checklist. Simply listening in some interior way to whatever the machine was already saying. Then he began. He did not start with the diagnostic port. The dealership's machines had already told the story their language was capable of telling, and Marcus knew the limits of that language intimately. He started instead with his hands, with the physical reality of the engine. He checked the obvious things first, not because he expected to find answers there, but because thoroughness was a form of respect he gave every machine regardless of how confident he felt. Coolant levels, belt tension, grounds. He moved through each check with the unhurried precision of someone who is not performing competence but simply exercising it. Rowan watched from a careful distance, pretending to scroll through something on his phone but actually watching everything. It was 22 minutes in when Marcus found the first real clue. It was not something the diagnostic machine could see. It was a pattern, a specific sequence in the engine's hesitation that Marcus had recognized within his first hour in the waiting room, sitting behind the glass, watching the 2 technicians stand with their arms crossed. The hesitation had a rhythm, a particular interval. It reminded him of something he had seen once 14 years ago, on a completely different vehicle from a completely different manufacturer, a failure mode so rare that it appeared in no standard diagnostic tree, had generated perhaps a handful of documented cases in the service literature, and required a very specific set of conditions to produce. He had solved it that first time by accident, by taking apart something he wasn't supposed to take apart and finding, inside a component that everyone assumed was functioning because the sensor said it was functioning, a mechanical reality that the sensor could not see. He crouched beside the engine and was quiet for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan said from his corner, unable to help himself. "Sure," Marcus said without looking up. "What are you looking for? Like specifically?" "Because we've run the full diagnostic 3 times and it keeps coming back clean." "I know," Marcus said. "That's the problem." Rowan frowned. "That it comes back clean? When the machine tells you everything is fine and the engine still won't run, you've got 2 choices," Marcus said. He was still crouched, still looking at something Rowan couldn't identify. "You either believe the machine, or you believe the engine." He glanced up briefly. "The engine is the one that actually has to run." He asked Rowan for a specific tool. Not one of the dealership's tools, but one from his own canvas bag, a compression gauge of a particular age and calibration that he had owned for 11 years and trusted more than anything newer. He performed a compression test not on the cylinders the diagnostic tree would have suggested, but on a specific cylinder based on the hesitation patterns interval, and the reading he got was not dramatically wrong, it was subtly wrong. Fractionally wrong. The kind of wrong that a technician running a standard protocol would note, consider borderline, and move past. Marcus did not move past it. He removed a component, carefully, methodically, with a gentleness that Rowan found oddly moving to watch, as though the engine were something that could feel how it was being handled. He held the component under the bay's work light, turned it slowly, and found what he had driven 40 minutes to find. A microfracture in a valve seat. Invisible to the sensor. Invisible to 3 rounds of standard diagnostics. Visible only under direct light to someone who knew to look for it, in a specific component that the diagnostic tree had not flagged because the surrounding sensor readings had been just normal enough to create plausible cover. In certain conditions, cold starts, specific temperature ranges after sustained idling, the fracture created a compression leak so precise in its timing that it produced exactly the hesitation pattern Marcus had recognized from the waiting room. The engine would turn over, would almost catch, would die, every time. It was, in the language of diagnostic work, extraordinarily rare. It was the kind of failure that required not just knowledge but memory, the specific, accumulated, non-transferable memory of a man who had spent 23 years listening to engines tell him where they hurt. Rowan had come to stand beside him now, looking at the component under the light. "That's it," Rowan said softly. "That's it," Marcus said. "We never would have found that." Marcus didn't answer. He set the component down gently on a clean shop rag and turned to check on Lily. She had finished her homework and was now sitting with her chin in her hands, watching him with her mother's eyes. Patient, warm, completely unsurprised. "Did you find it, Dad?" she asked. "Found it, bug," he said. She smiled, went back to her notebook, drew something small in the margin. Car, perhaps, or maybe a heart. He didn't ask. He got to work. It was nearly 11 o'clock when Derek Callahan came back. Marcus had not expected him. The dealership was officially closed. The showroom lights had dimmed to their overnight setting, casting the gleaming cars on the floor in a pale, institutional glow that made them look like exhibits rather than vehicles. The service bay was the only space still fully lit, and Marcus had been working steadily for nearly 4 hours, methodically, without drama, replacing the fractured valve seat with a component he had sourced from his own inventory. A part he had carried in the van because he had known, from the moment he recognized the hesitation pattern through the waiting room glass, exactly what he would need. He heard footsteps on the polished concrete and looked up to find Derek in the doorway. Behind him, barely visible in the dim showroom light, stood another man, older, heavier, wearing the specific kind of casual clothing that expensive people wear when they want to appear relaxed, pressed chinos, a quarter-zip pullover with a small logo that cost more than Marcus's monthly shop rent. This, Marcus would later learn, was Richard Calloway, the CEO, the man whose name was on the building. Derek's face had a look on it that Marcus recognized. He had seen it before, on the faces of people who had dismissed him and then been informed, by circumstances, that they may have made a mistake. It was not quite embarrassment and not quite anger. It was something between them, something that had not yet decided which direction it wanted to fall. "You're still here," Derek said. It was not quite a question. "Said I'd need one night," Marcus replied. He did not stop working. Calloway stepped forward past Derek, hands in his pockets, looking at the engine bay with the expression of a man who does not understand what he is seeing but understands that it is significant. His eyes moved from the engine to Marcus to Lily, who had fallen asleep on the rolling stool, her composition notebook in her lap, her head resting against the wall of the bay at an angle that looked uncomfortable but apparently wasn't, and then back to Marcus. "Derek tells me you found something," Calloway said. "Yes, sir. Something our team missed." "Yes, sir." There was a silence. Calloway looked at Derek. Derek looked at the floor. Marcus continued working because the work was not yet finished and the conversation, whatever it was going to become, could wait. "What was it?" Calloway asked. Marcus explained it. Briefly, clearly, without condescension. The microfracture, the valve seat, the specific hesitation pattern that had given it away. He explained why the standard diagnostic cycle had missed it, not as an accusation but as an observation, in the flat, factual tone of someone describing weather. Calloway listened with the focused attention of a man who has spent decades in rooms where information is currency and has learned to recognize when someone is spending the real thing. Derek, to his credit, also listened. His jaw was tight. His arms were crossed in the way arms cross when a body is managing feelings it has not yet processed. But he listened. "How long have you known?" Calloway asked. What the problem was. Marcus paused, set down his tool, looked at Calloway with the steady directness of a man who has nothing to perform and nothing to protect. "About 8 minutes after I walked in this afternoon," he said. The silence this time was different, fuller. It had weight. Derek made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a protest. Something between them. Calloway held up one hand, and Derek went quiet. 8 minutes, Calloway repeated. I recognized the hesitation pattern. I've seen it once before. 14 years ago, different manufacturer. Took me 2 days that time because I didn't know what I was looking for. Marcus picked up his tool again. Tonight I knew. What happened next was the crisis. Not the mechanical kind which Marcus had already solved, but the human kind which was messier and less predictable. Derek, in a voice that he had not entirely managed to keep level, said something that he would spend a long time afterward wishing he had kept inside. He said, "We should have the legal team look at this before anything gets documented. If there's a liability question about an uncertified technician working on a customer vehicle overnight." Marcus stopped working. He set the tool down on the shop rag. He turned around fully for the first time since Derek and Calloway had arrived. He looked at Derek with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier, anger would have given Derek something to respond to, but something quieter and more terminal. The expression of a man who has just heard, clearly and without ambiguity, exactly what another person thinks of him, and has accepted it not with hurt but with the finality of information. He looked at Lily sleeping on the stool. He thought about Mrs. Okafor, about dialysis 3 times a week, about a 71-year-old woman who had trusted him with her faith and her problem because she had no one else to call. He thought about the fact that he had driven 40 minutes, kept his daughter up past 11 on a school night, and spent 4 hours in a borrowed bay solving a problem that a building full of certified professionals and expensive machines had spent 19 days failing to solve, and that the first instinct of the institution was to discuss liability. He began, very calmly, to put his tools back in the canvas bag. "What are you doing?" Calloway said. "Leaving," Marcus said. "The repair isn't. It's 90% done," Marcus said. "Rowan can finish it. I walked him through the last steps an hour ago. He's more capable than you're giving him credit for." He zipped the bag. "The valve seat is in. The component is torqued to spec. She just needs the covers replaced and a cold start test in the morning." He lifted Lily gently from the stool. She stirred, murmured something, tucked her head against his shoulder without fully waking. He picked up the canvas bag with his free hand. He looked at Calloway once more and then at Derek, and then he walked toward the door. "Mr. Webb," Calloway said. Marcus stopped, did not turn around. "I'm sorry," Calloway said, "for how this went." Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, his daughter breathing slowly against his shoulder, the night air coming in from the parking lot, smelling like cut grass and cooling asphalt. He did not say it was fine. He did not say he understood. He did not offer the easy absolution that the moment seemed to be requesting. "Make sure Mrs. Okafor gets her car by morning," he said, and he walked out into the dark. Mrs. Patrice Okafor got her car back at 9:17 the following morning. Rowan had finished the repair at 7, run the cold start test twice as instructed, and personally driven the vehicle to her house rather than having her arrange pickup. He had stood on her porch and explained what had been wrong and who had found it. He did not have to do this. He was 23 years old and had no particular obligation to tell the story correctly. He told it anyway because some people are built that way, and because he had spent 4 hours the previous evening watching a man work with the kind of quiet excellence that changes something in you permanently if you're young enough and paying close enough attention. Mrs. Okafor had called Marcus at 9:42. She had cried, which embarrassed her, and she had apologized for crying, which made him smile. He told her not to apologize. He told her the car would run well. He told her to call him if anything felt different. She said she was going to bring him a pie. He said she didn't have to. She said she was going to anyway. He said all right. He was in his own shop by 10. Lily delivered to school with her hair braided and her lunch packed and a note from Marcus explaining her late arrival the previous night and asking that she be allowed to rest during any free periods. Her teacher, who had known Marcus for 3 years, had replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji and the words "she's a tough one," like her dad. Marcus had read this in the parking lot and sat with it for a moment before going inside. What happened next came in stages, the way reversals always do when they are real rather than cinematic. There was no single dramatic moment. There was instead a series of small, accumulating events that together constituted something larger. The first was Richard Calloway's phone call at 11:15. Marcus almost didn't answer. He was mid-job, hands in an engine, and he let it ring to voicemail before something made him stop and call back. Calloway answered on the first ring. He did not open with pleasantries. He said, "I've been in this business for 27 years. I've had 2 people in that time show me something I hadn't seen before. You're the third." He paused. "I'd like to know if there's a conversation worth having." Marcus asked what kind of conversation. Calloway said he wasn't entirely sure yet, but that he'd spent the morning thinking about what it meant that a man had sat in his waiting room for 90 minutes, been dismissed, been talked out of helping, and had then solved in one night a problem that his entire service department had not solved in 19 days. He said he thought it probably meant something was broken in his department that wasn't mechanical, and that he suspected he might need help seeing what it was. He said he was not in the habit of asking for help from people he had treated poorly, but that he was also not in the habit of letting his pride cost him more than it already had. Marcus listened to all of this without speaking. Then he said, "I'll call you back." He did not call back that day. He thought about it while he worked, not with drama, not with the satisfaction of revenge, but with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows that the correct response to a situation is not always the immediate one. He thought about what Calloway was actually offering, which was not yet clear, and what it would cost him to engage and what it would cost him not to. He thought about Lily's college fund, which existed but was thin. He thought about the shop, which he loved and which ran on margins that left no room for error. He thought about Mrs. Okafor calling him from a car that ran again, her voice cracking on the phone, and whether that was enough, whether that had ever been the question. The second stage of the reversal happened the following week, when Rowan called him. Not at Calloway's direction, Rowan was clear about this. On his own. He said that 3 of the senior technicians had asked about what had happened that night. Word had moved through the service department in the way word moves through small professional communities. Quickly, with embellishment, but with the core truth intact. That an outsider had found what they had missed. That he had found it with his hands. That he had been there with his daughter sleeping on a stool in the corner of the bay, and had almost walked out because of how they treated him, and had stayed anyway because an old woman needed her car. Rowan said, "They want to know if you'd be willing to come in. Not officially, just to talk through how you approached it. The diagnostic process." He paused. "I know that might feel weird, given everything." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't feel weird," he said. The third stage was the one that mattered most to him privately and that he never told anyone about. Not Calloway, not Rowan, not even yet Lily. That evening, after dinner, while Lily was doing her homework at the kitchen table, Marcus sat across from her with a cup of coffee and looked at the composition notebook she'd had in the shop that night. It was open to the page where she'd been working when she fell asleep. The homework was finished on one side of the page. In the margin, small, careful, in the purple pen she used for things she considered important, she had drawn something. Not a car, not a heart, a wrench. And beside it, in her neat, serious handwriting, for words, "Dad fixes hard things." He closed the notebook gently. He drank his coffee. Outside the kitchen window, the evening was settling into dark, and the neighborhood was quiet, and somewhere across town a silver sedan was sitting in a driveway, ready for its owner to get to where she needed to go. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, precisely the right size. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Okafor brought the pie. It was a sweet potato pie, made from a recipe she said had belonged to her mother, and before that her grandmother. And she carried it to the shop on a Tuesday afternoon in a dish covered with aluminum foil and a kitchen towel printed with blue flowers. She was small and wore her silver hair pulled back and moved with the particular careful dignity of a person who has decided, after considerable living, not to waste energy on being anything other than exactly herself. Marcus cleared a space on the work table. They sat on 2 shop stools and ate pie from paper plates, and Mrs. Okafor talked about her late husband, about how he had loved cars, had always insisted on taking them to the dealership because he'd felt it was the proper thing to do, the responsible thing, the thing that serious people did. She said she thought about him every time she drove now. That the car felt different since Marcus had fixed it. Not mechanically different, though it ran better than it had in years, she said. Better than before the trouble started. But different in the way that things feel different when they've been given care they needed and didn't receive for a long time. Marcus nodded. He understood this exactly. Lily was there that afternoon. A half day at school, dropped at the shop as she sometimes was on half days, doing homework in the corner on the rolling stool that had become, without anyone officially declaring it, her stool. When Mrs. Okafor offered her a piece of pie, Lily accepted it with the formal gratitude she reserved for adults she had decided to respect, and Mrs. Okafor looked at her for a long moment with the appraising warmth of a woman who has raised children and recognizes something in this one. "You are a very serious little girl," Mrs. Okafor said. "People say that," Lily replied. "It's a compliment." "I know," Lily said. "My dad is serious too." Mrs. Okafor looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his pie. "Yes," Mrs. Okafor said softly. "He is." After she left, Marcus washed the paper plates and stood at the shop sink for a moment, looking out the small window above it at the parking lot, at the afternoon light doing what afternoon light does in early autumn, going golden long, falling at the angle that makes ordinary things look briefly beautiful. He thought about the word serious and whether it had always felt like a compliment, and decided it was starting to. He had called Calloway back 5 days after the initial call. They had met for coffee at a diner equidistant between the dealership and Marcus's shop. Marcus's choice? Because neutral ground felt important, and because he preferred places where the coffee came in thick mugs and nobody had been trained to smile. Calloway had come alone. Had not brought a business card or a prepared proposal or a lawyer. Had come, as far as Marcus could tell, as simply himself, which turned out to be, beneath the chinos and the quarter zip and the 27 years of institutional authority, a man who was genuinely trying to understand where he had gone wrong and what it might cost him to go right. They had talked for 2 hours. Marcus had agreed to nothing firm. He had said he would think about a consulting arrangement, coming in occasionally to work with the service team on complex diagnostic cases, sharing methodology, helping build the kind of experiential knowledge that no certification program could transfer. He had been clear about his terms. His shop came first, his hours were his own, and if anyone on the service floor treated him the way Derek had treated him in that waiting room, he would leave without a second conversation. Calloway had agreed to all of it without negotiating. Marcus had not seen Derek since the night in the bay. He did not know what had happened internally, whether there had been a conversation, a consequence, a reckoning of some kind. He found, to his own quiet surprise, that he did not need to know. He did not require Derek's humiliation to feel that something had been corrected. He required only that the work be taken seriously and that Mrs. Okafor could get to her appointments. Both of these things were now true. It was enough. This was the thing that Marcus Webb had learned in the long difficult schooling of his life. In the years of being overlooked and underpaid and dismissed and widowed and left alone with a small daughter and a rented bay and a second-hand lift and a reputation that traveled only by word of mouth. That satisfaction does not come from being seen by the people who refuse to see you. It comes from the work itself. From the engine that runs. From the woman who calls you from a car that moves again and cries a little and apologizes for crying. From the child in the corner of the bay who draws a wrench in the margin of her notebook and writes 4 words beside it that she will probably not remember writing but that her father will carry for the rest of his life. He dried his hands on a shop rag and walked back to where Lily was sitting. She had finished her homework. She was drawing something now, elaborate, concentrated, her purple pen moving with the committed energy of someone who has decided to make something real. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She turned the notebook so he could see. It was the shop. Their shop. She had drawn the bay doors, the lift, the work table. She had drawn 2 figures inside, one large, one small. The large one was bent over an engine. The small one was sitting on a stool, watching. Above the drawing, in careful letters, she had written a title. Marcus looked at it for a long time. Outside, a car pulled into the lot. He could hear it before he saw it. The idle, the slight hesitation on the turnover, the particular rhythm of something that needed attention and had come to the right place. He picked up his coffee. He put on his glasses. He rolled up his sleeves. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And he had always been exactly the right man to do it.